Good morning on this Sunday, September 29th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. The wrath of Hurricane Helene and the aftermath in metro Atlanta and across Georgia. Also, Georgia Democrats sue Governor Brian Kemp to try and oust 3 members of Georgia's election board. And several Gen Z candidates are entering the world of politics, running for state house in Georgia. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Brian are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Hurricane Helene batters Georgia, leaving a path of destruction. Governor Brian Kemp warned Georgians the damage from Helene could be more costly than Hurricane Michael. Georgia Power prepped with more than 10,000 personnel on the ground to respond to massive power outages. You see some of the destruction there we're showing there. And at the time of this taping, we don't know the full impacts of Helene. We may not know those full impacts for weeks, but I haven't seen a storm this big cover the entire state.
Well, if you look at how Fox 5 and other news channels really were very over-communicative about, hey, stay inside, like this is going to be bad. And you mentioned Georgia Power. Laura, you and I were just talking before the show. We think it maybe was more than 10,000. It was probably closer to 16,000, and hopefully they'll confirm that. So it's definitely 3 things at stake here. Number one, you saw the state, the governor, come out and say state of emergency. Then you saw the mayors and the county commissioners. And we don't give the county a lot of credit. Phil, you mentioned that. But these county public works offices, watershed, were out there throughout the night. A lot of people didn't sleep to make sure that we were prepared. Then you get to, okay, the flooding. And this is a sort of another need for infrastructure. And just the massive rain that we've seen. Georgia has never seen this much consistency. 3 days almost of raining. And so I just want to tell people, number one, listen to your local government officials, state and federal, and stay inside if you don't have to be outside. And then 2, be patient. That's one of the things that Georgia Power and news outlets have been saying. It's going to take a while to get power restored. And then thirdly, I think that you're going to look at the mayor of Atlanta and other mayors across the state. And we know the CSSRA got hit pretty bad over in Augusta, Savannah area. So we're definitely praying for the lives that were lost. I think we confirmed that maybe 2 lives were lost in Georgia.
Well, the death toll is going to just continue.
But the death toll will
increase. We don't know because by Sunday when the show
But
airs.
everyone just be patient and just know that there's a team of people, government and the private sector, working together to restore power. And
you saw some of the swiftwater rescues that we were showing there. Just a huge shout out to all of the first responders, the emergency crews who are responding. You know, they'll be responding probably for days on end, Phil.
Well, that's right. And that's some dramatic footage that, that Fox 5 Atlanta has and some of the other stations. I think that preparations are good in some areas and preparations are not so good in others. You think, Lori, we've talked about this, that in some of these areas where you've had flooding, we've had storms before, we know where some of the problems area is, and you mentioned infrastructure there, and we're not doing it, especially in metro Atlanta. There's spots where we are not dealing with infrastructure properly to get this flood water away from people and protect the public. And yes, Augusta was hit very hard, and I'm worried about our farmers, and you know, agriculture is our #1 industry in the state, and we're getting reports that that's going to be a tough one.
Melita.
Well, farmers were they were running tractors and harvest machinery around the clock as the storm approached for the cotton crop and the peanut crop, which were near harvest.
And pecans, I think, too.
Pecan trees they were hard hit by Michael, and it takes 8 to 10 years for pecan trees to reach maturity. So some of the pecan trees planted after Michael destroyed orchards are not even back up to full maturity and producing fruit yet. So the pecan industry is a huge industry. And then the other thing is you have new crops of blueberries and olive trees that are also hard hit. So these tree crops, so to speak, it'll take a while to know the full extent of that damage. I did learn something last night talking to some people on a pecan farm, is that the irrigated pecan orchards are more vulnerable to damage because the roots don't go as deep in those orchards as the non-irrigated orchards. So there'll be weeks before we know the full impact of the agricultural damage.
Brian, over to you, because you were on the inside of these storms when you worked for Governor Nathan Deal, and the governor, Brian Kemp, he actually declared a state of emergency early. He declared a state of emergency on Tuesday. Just from an inside perspective, now that you're on the outside, what is your take on how the state prepared? I mean, it's very difficult to prepare for a storm that's going to hit all 159 counties.
Well, going ahead and doing the declaration of an emergency allows the state and federal resources to be mobilized into the state and to stage the rescue and recovery efforts that are necessary. And one thing we're seeing from Governor Kemp here that I think is an important best practices is he was communicating with us before, he was communicating with us during, and communicating with us after. And I think he's struck the right tone. I heard him on Friday morning in the immediate aftermath of the storm, talking about the farmers, talking about how this was the worst possible time for these farmers to get hit because of where they are in the harvest season, but also the sheer devastation in a number of cities, including Douglas, Valdosta, Augusta. So I think we're going to continue to hear from Governor Kemp. I think we're going to soon see some footage of him in a helicopter overlooking the damage. That's another way of showing Georgians that you are on the scene, that you care, that you're engaged, and that you are doing everything you can, and the state is doing everything it can to get us back to normal. As we're taping, there's still over 700,000, maybe 1 million Georgians who are without power. So there's a lot of work to be done in the coming days.
And Theron, someone else who we saw out and about and really on the front lines was Mayor Andre Dickens. Saw him, visiting Georgia Power to see what type of preparations that they were doing. He was communicating before, during, and after the storm.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, Mayor Dickens went to Georgia Power along with Kim Green. They did a joint sort of briefing together, and what you saw through social media was them being sort of briefed and sort of predicting it to the best ability what a storm is going to hit. But also, I just want to give a shout out to his team. A lot of folks, what I'm hearing, did not go to sleep that night. Like, they did not go to sleep Thursday night, Friday morning. And so the fact that the mayor actually had public works, watershed, public safety was a big deal in this too. We're not hearing a lot about vandalism and things that are happening. And so definitely just want to make sure. And then lastly, Laura, we can't forget the schools. The principals, the superintendents, they were very communicative early on, saying shut down schools, we want people off the road.
Yeah, they're proactive. Phil.
Yeah, I was happy about that too with the school system. I think that the electric membership corporations, the EMCs, and also the Georgia Transmission Corporation, to Brian's point, you saw these kick in very effectively, and so we can be happy about that, even though we're still assessing the damage.
Yeah. Melita, was it early enough, and did the state, in your eyes, do enough to prepare?
Oh, I think they did, and I think this is the kind of storm that you really, as we've all said, you can't necessarily prepare for because it was so big. I mean, it was 500 miles wide, and that's even bigger than the state of Georgia is wide. Right. And so it really wasn't something that there was much you can do. And for example, the farmers, you can't do anything to protect an orchard of pecan trees.
Absolutely. All right. On to politics. Coming up, Democrats want 3 members of the Georgia Election Board ousted, and they're prepared to fight it out in court.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Georgia Democrats are trying to force Governor Brian Kemp to open an ethics investigation into the state elections board. They filed a lawsuit to try and remove 3 members of the board who former President Trump praised as pit bulls. Phil, one of our panelists, Kathy Woolard, is also joining in that lawsuit.
Well, that's right, and I think a lot of this is politics rather than looking at the law. I think that Kathy Woolard and the other plaintiffs in the lawsuit have a big problem. Lawyers tell me it's a standing problem. Now, do they have standing? As we all know, that's very important in these lawsuits. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think they do, is my own opinion. And also, with regard to Attorney General Chris Carr, he has said that he's not going to trigger any ethics hearing or anything like that, just based on some citizen complaint.
Melita.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what a judge says, because this is a request for a writ of mandamus, which would be a court order compelling a government official to perform a duty that is legally required of them. And so the judge will hear them out in this complaint, and he might have an opinion different, or she might have an opinion different from that of the Attorney General.
Brian, is there any way for them to be ousted from this board?
There's been a lot of discussion about this, because there's a lot of confusion because this doesn't come up a lot. But the House and Senate each have one appointment, and they can remove their appointee with a majority vote of either body. But of course, they're not in session right now, so that's not going to happen. I'm not sure that Governor Kemp has the authority to just remove appointees after they've been appointed. They've got a term of office, and generally you're allowed to serve that term of office without interference. Now, I know in the Dill administration, we told our opponents what we wanted them to do. I would assume that Governor Kemp's probably involved in having those conversations with his appointees as well. But they're going about this wrong. The way to do this isn't to remove the members. It is, if you think that they're breaking the law, take it to court. We have numerous court cases, some from Democrats, one from a Republican group, suing the state election board over what they're doing right now. Let's see what the courts say on those issues. Like, do they have the right to make these rules within 4 months of an election, which the Attorney General has said they don't. The Secretary of State has backed that up. We've got a Republican group saying that a appointed board that is not elected cannot make rules that go beyond what the General Assembly has set forth in law. This is all going through the legal process. Let's let it play out.
Theron, I also want to talk about what the state election board is actually doing, because they voted to mandate the hand counting of all ballots cast on election day, and board member Janice Johnson said people were overreacting, that people should just take a deep breath and calm down over this.
Yeah, this is a serious matter. We can't calm down. It's not only dangerous, but it's the distraction. And the fact that you've now had local school boards, Lori, push back, and I'm being told that there are going to be multiple lawsuits that are going to come out from counties. You're going to have a lot of counties, probably up until a dozen plus, that are going to sue the state. They're going to push back and say, this is vague. It's not clear what you want us to do. You're taking away authority from us. You're actually being able to sort of demand a hand count before the counties can even certify their vote. But I have to say this, listen to what B. Rob just said. It's okay, it's politics. When you appoint someone to a board, you usually want that woman or man to carry out the duties and what you want them to do, right? But the fact that the governor did not come out right away and praise this unlawful meeting they had right away. Donald Trump started this when he praised them from the microphone. Had he not done that, we could have basically not made this as political. And then the other thing that's going on is that we've had a former governor who's come out and said you don't make changes to an election this close to election. And I'm going to say this real quick. Hold on, Phil, let me get this. I think that there's a lot of Republicans out there that actually are looking at this very closely, because no matter whether you support Trump or not, they know that this is wrong. And we saw what happened in 2020. And a lot of Republicans want Donald Trump and others to stop talking about what happened in 2020 and focus on the future. And so we as Democrats have got to follow these lawsuits. The counties are going to follow lawsuits. But more importantly, we got to call it for what it is, Lori. It's a distraction. It's dangerous, and it's also trying to destroy democracy. And I think that these three board members who are supporting this ought to be ashamed of themselves.
Oh, that's outrageous. This is not destroying democracy. My goodness, that's a crazy. Well, let me speak. And you know what, Theron? You don't realize Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger made changes way at the last minute. This last minute change stuff is bogus.
A Republican governor said,
you're not going to let me speak,
no,
I guess.
Former Republican governor.
You know, you can do this hand count. There's going to be no delays. That's another myth that we hear. You have to certify the Monday after Election Day, and if you're not happy with the certification or the hand count or whatever we're doing, you can just say, okay, we're certifying by law. They have to do it, and then you could come back later. And then, as Brian says, fight it out in court. So there's a lot of mythology here, and Theron, I'm disappointed that you keep claiming that this is a threat to democracy. These are fine people that are on this election board. They're trying to do a job, and yet they're attacked.
Melita, supporters say that the hand counting will not delay the outcome.
Well,
what is your take?
There are misconceptions about what the hand count actually means. What the hand count means is a hand count of the number of ballots cast in each polling place before the equipment or the boxes go down to the central counting place, where then they are counted per race and run through other machinery. But what we've been talking about, the certification process, that is something that the Elections Board made changes to. There is a lawsuit about that. Judge Robert McBurney has set an October 1 bench trial on that particular lawsuit. And so early next week, in that trial, we will have some clarity on at least that lawsuit. Okay. So this is going to be an ever-changing landscape as these things go through the courts and emergency hearings and the rest of the process between now and November.
Okay, let's move on and talk about who's on the ballot. Presidential candidates Cornel West and Claudia De La Cruz aren't qualified to be on Georgia's ballots, and votes for them should not count, according to Georgia's Supreme Court ruling on Wednesday. Phil De La Cruz said both Democrats and Republicans in Georgia are to blame for suppressing democracy. That's a favorite term I think you like.
Yeah. I've always been in favor of, if they can meet the petition requirements in the state of Georgia, let the candidates be on the ballot, whether they're communists or whoever. You don't have to agree with them, but I think people ought to have the right to have the choice. I think what the Republicans actually have been trying to support democracy, and the Democrats have been trying to keep these candidates off because they're afraid that it'll hurt Kamala Harris. So the Republicans are doing the right thing here in supporting democracy. And may go to the federal courts.
I will say it's Kamala Harris.
I was going to say it, but
I know it. I know it.
Let me say that. No, you know it, but you choose to mispronounce it, but that's okay, because she's going to be the next president. No, look, Lori, I'm a huge fan of Cornel West. I think what the Secretary of State's office said is that it's too late to reprint the ballots. The other thing is that they will remain on the ballot. People will be able to vote for them. What I'm afraid of is that actually I think a lot of people who should be voting for Vice President Kamala Harris are going to probably look at these other two candidates, right? So I think that takes away votes from her. And maybe they want to vote for Trump as well. But I think ultimately, look, I kind of agree with Phil. I think that if people want to run, there should be a process for them to be in place to run. And you do have to follow deadlines. You have to make sure you go through the process. But ultimately, it is what it is, and we'll see what happens.
All right, meanwhile, Brian, the parade of candidates continues in this battleground state of Georgia. We saw former President Trump in Savannah Tuesday, Vice President Kamala Harris in Metro Atlanta just a few days before. How much do these visits really make a difference in a battleground state like Georgia?
Well, it certainly keeps the election front and center with any small pocket of Georgia voters. We had a 12,000 vote margin in 2020, the smallest by percentage in the entire country. And so one thing I think is really interesting here is normally a national candidate that came to Georgia would just come to Atlanta. Our media market is 70% of the state. It reaches the vast majority of Georgia voters. But you see people going to Valdosta and Savannah and Macon, teeny tiny media markets as far as their role in the entire state, because every pocket of Georgia voters matter. So I think it's important for showing energy, for showing enthusiasm. If you see your neighbor going to a rally or putting up a sign, it may not influence your vote, but it may encourage you, to energize you to go to the polls. So, obviously we don't see them going to safe states, other than Trump going to Alabama on Saturday to see the dogs. Other than
bad luck for us.
But even then, Trump was going to Alabama so that Georgians would see him on TV, right? So every one of these little markets in Georgia is powerful and can be a decision maker in this election.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, Gen Z on the ballot in Georgia. Several young candidates are making a run for the state house. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The AJC had an interesting article this week out on at least 5 Gen Z candidates on the ballot for the state house. Now, if you're in Gen Z, that means you were born between 1997 and 2012. I think it's safe to say none of us are Gen Zers. Melita, I love to see young folks involved in politics. What's your take here?
Well, I think it's wonderful because it will help young turnout for voting, and I've spoken to some of these young people. Georgia Windlist endorsed Madeline Ryan Smith. Ashwin Ramaswamy is a very bright young man, and some of the others are very, very bright. Barry is the former president of the Young Dems. So they're bringing an energy to the campaign trail. They're motivating other young people to be involved in politics. So it's all a good thing.
A lot of these are Dems, Phil. What about Republicans and attracting the young voters?
Well, I tell you, I think both parties are hitting the young vote. The polls show that between 18 and 25, it's swung toward the Republicans for the first time. Even Gallup, which is not a conservative organization, says that. So I'm happy too. Melita didn't mention the open socialist that's running in the Smyrna-based area. He's crazy. He's anti-cop, and he may have a shot at winning. If this is the type of radical Democrats we're seeing, I have great hope for the center-right winning.
Let's not call people crazy.
Thank you. I was going to say thank you. Let's not do that, Phil. No,
That's my First Amendment right.
That's right. That's true. All right, no, look.
Not on this show.
No First
The
Amendment?
thing that I'm happy about, Laura, is that number one, we got to give a shout out to the Gen Z community. B-Rob and I know this. When we talk and go to a lot of places, and the energy is there in their community. I mean, they're our next leaders, right? So when I look at this long list, and you're right, Barry definitely is a rock star, and I think he's going to win his seat over there against Misha Maynard because it's just a Democrat district, and I like him a lot. And then, if you look at the other race that you mentioned, Sean Steele, who's a state senator, it's a pretty tough race for him too. So I think there's a lot of things going on there. He's working very hard in that district. I know Republicans are working to try to keep that seat, but his opponent is getting a lot of money. But the thing I would just remind people, Laura, is that I was once that young voter at the age of a young advocate at the age of 22. I went to Cobb County, where Cobb County at the time did not have a Democrat elected to the state legislature. And guess who campaign I worked on? Alicia Thomas, now Cersei, right? And so you're going to remember these names, and they may be sitting in this chair one day, because it's this type of activism at this age when people are running for office that's going to change the whole landscape of Georgia. And I think this benefits Democrats, because we definitely know how to make sure that the Gen Z can align with our policies.
All right, well, of course, an issue that they are concerned about, and I want to keep the Appalachia school shooting in the news. The New York Times out with a story about the number of threats after the violence in Barrow County. In Georgia alone, 98 students were taken into custody within 2 weeks of the attacks for threats. Brian, I mean, the sheriffs, the police officers are not taking any chances on this at all.
Reading this story was just depressing as much as it was alarming to see what it said to me. And as a parent, I want the police to be very vigilant when it comes to people making threats. I'm sure people in Barrow County and all over Georgia are still upset that there was a missed opportunity with the shooter in that particular case last year. And that's got to be heart-wrenching if you lost your child, or you lost your family member who was a teacher. But what I also see as a parent is a lot of children who are hurting, a lot of children who are not okay. And it is in Georgia, but it's around the country that we saw this response to the Appalachia shooting, with these threats on social media, making jokes on text threads with friends. It is so upsetting that this is where kids are. And look, we didn't have social media or cell phones when I was a kid, so we didn't have the danger of doing it on these sort of platforms. But I don't remember this being a thing. We didn't think like this. And we obviously have a mental health crisis in this country. I think we have a family crisis in this country, and this is how it's manifesting. And there is no easy answer. It is not putting 10-year-olds in prison for life. That is not the way to do it. But when it gets to be 16, 17, maybe we have to make an example of someone who does this. Kids have got to know the severity of what they may see as flippant jokes. It's going to shut down a community, and they're coming after you. So we've got to be careful, but we've got to take care of the needs of these kids too.
And Melita, it's a good time to mention the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is there for everyone. All calls are confidential.
Absolutely, but I think the thing that was most disturbing is that because there were 700 of these children and teenagers taken into custody nationwide, but 98 of them were in Georgia. So it really needs to be some Georgia legislators, some Georgia leaders, some Georgia thought leaders looking at why is that number so high in Georgia. Is it mental health resources that our schools need? Do we need more counselors? But somebody besides the New York Times needs to be calling that out in Georgia and trying to find the solutions that our state needs.
Okay, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Couple viewer shout outs real quick. A shout out to Cobb County's Chief Probate Judge Kelly Wolk. I met her this week. I want to say thanks for watching. Also, Rich and Jean Sinnott of Cherokee County. Their daughter Laura Peters tells me that they never miss a week, so we love our loyal viewers. Brian.
My losers this week, sadly, are Georgia's farmers, because this is harvest season. This is a very important time for them, but also all of those homeowners down there in South Georgia and in East Georgia who've taken the hardest hits here. So our thoughts and prayers are with them, and thank you to the linemen. Thank you to the emergency rescue first responders. Thank you to the police. Thank you to Governor Kemp and all of the state's leadership for what you're doing.
All right, Theron.
I echo what Brian said. Thank you to all the line workers. I think you named them all. Public Works, Watershed, everyone, the teachers, even people here at Fox 5 who basically gave us great coverage.
And slept here.
Hey, and then also, because I was out the last 2 weeks, sorry you all, I took a little vacation. That's why the goatee is a little full.
I missed you.
You missed me? I missed you too, Phil. Yeah, you wanted to save democracy. Shout out to my mother. She won't let me tell her age on TV, but definitely happy birthday to my sugar. And then also, Lori and I decided that I was not going to bring the yellow towel, the terrible towel, but I lost a bet privately with her because my Falcons, who need a win today, lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yes.
Well, I got one winner, and it's Fulton County Superior Court Judge Craig Schwall. He was presiding over these lawyers that were trying to get these two jailbirds freed. They were the ones that are in jail now. They were part of when the Wendy's burned down in Atlanta during the summer riots a few years ago. And Judge Schwall said, no, you're not getting anything. You're going back to jail. You're going to trial. And if we had a good district attorney in Fulton County, they ought to get the death penalty, because that was a terrible thing where the police were told not to go in, and armed thugs just controlled that area and shot the little girl.
Alito.
Well, I want to make my winner all the people at Children's Healthcare in Eggleston who are in the midst of a massive transfer of patients, children, from one hospital to the other as this show airs. A lot of planning went into that. And I want to make my loser the Project 2025 provisions, which would eliminate the National Weather Service and its parent agency, because if anything we've learned from this week is that's a critical need, and government needs to retain ownership of it.
All right, we've got like a couple extra seconds. I want to go back to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, because they are moving 65 ambulances will be making continuous loops to shuttle more than 300 patients to the new Arthur M. Blank Hospital. So that's an amazing feat. So good luck to all of them. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.